Cruel stepfather pushed blind boy into a hole, but the hero dog saved him. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always awesome to see how far our stories are reaching. Michael, a 10-year-old boy, lost his sight at 3 after a fever left him in a coma for weeks. His eyes, a milky blue, seemed to gaze at the world, but they saw only vague shadows that faded in his mind. Michael spent most of his days on an old, worn-out couch, clutching a Braille book he had read countless times. It wasn't for fun. It was his way of feeling less alone. His mother, Sarah, was a young woman with a tired face and a quiet voice. She walked with her head down, as if afraid to meet the world's eyes, and her fear had a name: Derek. Derek was his stepfather, a burly man with a scruffy beard and a hard stare. He worked as a mechanic, though he'd been fired more than once for fights and drinking. Since he came into Sarah's life, their home turned grey, a place where laughter had no place and silence was a shield. Derek never accepted Michael. He never touched him with kindness or spoke a warm word. To him, Michael was just a piece of furniture in the way. "That useless kid is driving me nuts," Derek would say, not bothering to lower his voice. Sarah pretended not to hear, maybe out of fear, maybe because, deep down, she thought there was no way out. Michael sensed it all. He didn't need eyes to know he was a burden. He learned to move carefully, to make no noise, to ask for nothing. His only comfort was his nightly prayer, whispered from his bed, repeating the same words every night: "God, I don't need to see. I just need someone to see me." One day, while walking along the roadside with his cane, Michael heard a panting sound, then a soft growl. He froze, scared. He couldn't tell where it came from, but then a wet tongue licked his hand. He stepped back, but the presence felt warm, friendly. The animal stayed by his side, as if waiting for him. "Are you a dog?" Michael whispered, stroking its furry head. "You're really big." It was Max, a retired Belgian shepherd from the K9 unit, now living at the local shelter 2 blocks away. After being injured in service, he was deemed unfit for patrols, but no one said he couldn't still be a hero. From that day on, Max waited for Michael every afternoon, sitting by the roadside until the boy passed with his cane. Sarah noticed the routine, but said nothing. Derek, on the other hand, grew angry. "I don't want that mangy dog near this house. If I see it again, I'll shoot it." Michael trembled whenever he heard those words, but stayed quiet. He only hugged Max tighter when they met. They didn't need words. Michael felt that this dog truly saw him. What Michael didn't know was that his life was about to sink into an even deeper darkness. The sun was just brushing the treetops when Michael woke to the sound of a muffled argument in the kitchen. Though he couldn't see, his other senses were sharp as knives. He recognized the shaky tone of his mother, Sarah, the way her voice quivered when Derek cut her off. That day, the shouting didn't last long, just a final door slam, followed by a thick, smoky silence. Michael got up without a word, feeling his way along the doorframe to the hallway. He held a piece of dry bread he'd saved from the day before, nibbling it with resignation. He knew better than to ask for coffee or milk. He'd learned that staying out of the way made survival easier. Outside in the yard, the air smelled of wet earth. He took slow steps, guided by the familiar rustle of trees swaying in the wind. Max was waiting for him. He always was. The dog, with his black and tan fur, approached gently and nudged Michael's hand with his nose. Michael smiled for the first time in days. "You came back. So did I." They sat together in the grass. Max rested his big head on the boy's legs and closed his eyes. Michael stroked his neck gently, speaking in a low voice as if afraid the wind might betray him. "When I'm with you, I feel like I actually exist." That was the first day Michael cried without feeling weak. The tears didn't come from fear or pain, but from the strange comfort that flowed from Max's presence. No one could explain why this dog understood him so well. He just knew it was true. A few yards away, behind the fence, Derek watched from the porch, a beer in hand, and his eyes narrowed. He didn't like their connection. It felt like a threat, something he couldn't control. "Useless kid," he muttered, grinding his teeth. That night, as Sarah tried to serve dinner in silence, Derek smashed his plate against the wall without warning. The crash made Michael flinch. Then came the silence, more dangerous than the shouts. "Tomorrow, I'm taking him to the woods. Says he likes walking. I'll give him a walk he won't forget," Derek said with a twisted smile. Sarah didn't reply. She just picked up the broken pieces of ceramic with her bare hands, not looking at her son, not looking at anyone. Michael didn't need explanations. He felt the shift in the air, the way the house seemed to shrink, to grow dimmer. The next morning, early, Derek forced Michael to put on a heavy jacket and shoved him toward the car without saying where they were going. The engine roared as they drove down a dirt road. Michael didn't ask. He clung to the seatbelt and the rosary hanging around his neck. His lips moved soundlessly. "Praying," Derek mocked. "Better ask your God to teach you to see, 'cause you're gonna need eyes today." A few miles from town, they stopped in a wooded area, far from everything. Derek got out and opened the passenger door. "Get out, we're walking." Michael obeyed. He stumbled through rocks, roots, and mud, guided by his cane. He fell twice, but got up without complaining. Not out of bravery, out of habit. Derek steered him with a hand on his shoulder, but then the hand was gone. Silence. Michael felt the ground vanish beneath him. He fell. A short, choked scream. Darkness swallowed him as his body hit the bottom of a natural pit, hidden among brush and rocks. And in that moment nearby, rapid footsteps and a deep, urgent bark tore through the air. Max, who had followed them silently from a distance, reached the edge just as Michael's body disappeared into the hole. He didn't hesitate. He jumped, as if his soul was tied to the boys, as if he knew it wasn't a choice, but a calling. The air inside the pit was heavy, damp as if time had frozen among the buried roots. Michael lay motionless on the rocky ground, a cut on his forehead, bleeding slowly. He didn't scream. He didn't cry. He just breathed heavily, trying to figure out if he was still alive, or if he'd crossed the threshold he'd heard about in Sunday sermons. He felt something warm brush his cheek, then a low whimper, like someone sharing his pain. It was Max. The dog had fallen with him, but his sturdy body cushioned the impact. Max dragged himself to the boy, sniffing him desperately, nudging his hand with his nose. "Max," Michael whispered, as if unsure if he was dreaming. The dog gently licked the blood from his face and lay beside him, wrapping his muscular body around the boy, sharing warmth in the cold underground. Michael, trembling, clung to Max's fur like it was life itself. "I thought he left me alone," he said in a faint voice. Max let out a soft whimper, almost human. He didn't need words. He was there. He always would be. Meanwhile, above ground, Derek stood at a distance from the pit. He didn't dare look inside. He wasn't sure if the boy was dead or the dog, but part of him preferred it that way. It was easier to explain absence than presence. He turned, lit a cigarette, and walked back to the car as if nothing had happened. "One less," he muttered before starting the engine. Hours passed. The sun shifted. The forest filled with long shadows. Down in the pit, Max didn't move. He breathed deeply, in bursts, letting out short, sharp barks, growing louder, like a call for help aimed at the sky. Michael, with his eyes closed, began to pray softly. "Our Father who art in heaven." His words trembled, not from fear, but from faith. Max, as if he understood, joined with soft whimpers, creating a strange melody between human and animal. The boy wasn't praying for a miracle for himself. He prayed someone would hear the dog, and someone did. An old man named Henry, gathering firewood nearby, stopped when he heard the barks. They weren't ordinary barks. They were steady, rhythmic, like a message. Following the sound, he reached the edge of the pit and looked down. His tired but sharp eyes recognized the Belgian shepherd instantly. "My God, it's Max!" he exclaimed. He ran to town without catching his breath. Within minutes, a fire truck sped toward the spot, guided by Henry. The men descended with ropes, flashlights, and tense faces. They didn't know what they'd find, but something in those barks told them time was critical. "Come on, guys, there's life down there," one of the rescuers shouted. When a rope finally lowered into the pit, Max struggled to his feet and nudged Michael toward it with his nose. He refused to go first. He let out a firm bark, like giving an order. The firefighter who descended noticed. "This dog, he's protecting him." Michael was lifted slowly, eyes closed, hands clutching Max's collar, which he held onto. At the surface, paramedics rushed to him. He was breathing. His pulse was weak, but he was alive. A firefighter went down again for the dog. Max, exhausted, let them put the harness on him, but before going up, he looked back at the pit, as if making sure nothing was left behind. When both were on the surface, Henry took off his hat in respect. "That dog's no animal, he's an angel with paws." Max walked slowly to Michael and lay beside him, exhaling deeply, as if he knew his mission wasn't over. But for that day, he could rest. Cedar Valley's county hospital was small, with pale walls and the sharp smell of disinfectant. In the emergency room, Michael lay on a stretcher wrapped in thermal blankets, his face pale, lips cracked, and a bandage on his forehead. He slept deeply, as if his body had finally been given permission to rest. Max lay at the foot of the stretcher, still, his head low between his paws. His ears barely twitched at the hallway noises. He'd been treated for minor scrapes and bruises, but his biggest issue was extreme exhaustion. Yet he refused to close his eyes. The doctors spoke quietly as they checked Michael's heart monitor. A pediatrician, Dr. Thompson, tall and gray-haired, scribbled on his clipboard with a worried look. He's got bruises, a slight fracture in his right rib, and severe dehydration, but he's going to pull through. Sarah arrived soon after, pale, her coat on crooked, eyes glassy. When she saw her son in that state, she collapsed. She fell to her knees beside the stretcher and cried silently, covering her mouth to keep from screaming. "What did they do to you, my love?" she whispered, stroking his arm with trembling hands. Dr. Thompson looked at her cautiously. "The police want to talk to you, Mom. They say there's evidence of serious neglect and something else." Sarah didn't answer. Her face hardened for a moment, as if she knew the years of avoiding the truth were catching up with her. Outside the hospital, a patrol car pulled up with its lights off. 2 officers stepped out. One was Agent Emily Carter, a woman with a steady gaze and her hair in a tight braid. She'd been Max's partner back in his active K9 days. When she saw him, her expression softened. "Hey, old friend," she said gently, kneeling to pet him. Max lifted his head and sniffed her hand, then licked it with a hint of recognition. "Is it true what they say? You jumped after him?" The dog didn't answer, but his eyes spoke clearer than any human testimony. Meanwhile, Derek was at home, sprawled on the couch with the TV blaring and a half-empty beer in his hand. He didn't seem worried. In fact, his face showed a strange calm. That peace shattered when he heard loud knocks at the door. "Derek Johnson?" a firm voice asked. He opened the door with a sneer. Seeing the officers, he frowned. "What do you want now?" "We need you to come to the station to answer questions about the disappearance of the minor, Michael Harrison. We have witnesses, footprints, and the dog." Derek laughed coldly. "You're going to believe a dog?" Agent Carter didn't blink. "That dog saved more lives than you could ever dream of, and this time, he's helping us find the truth." Inside the hospital, Michael woke slowly. Opening his sightless eyes, he reached out into the air. "Max!" The dog, as if waiting for the signal, stood and moved closer. Michael hugged him, burying his face in his warm fur. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." Emily Carter watched from the doorway and swallowed hard. Then she turned to Sarah. "Did he tell you what happened?" Sarah nodded, still unable to speak. Derek pushed him. "I heard him say he wanted to teach him a lesson. I didn't do anything. And for that, I won't fight being investigated. But please save him, save Michael." The agent placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's not alone anymore." In that moment, something shifted in the hospital air, as if the place itself knew a battle had been won. Not all of them, but one at least. In the corner, Max settled beside Michael and closed his eyes for the first time in days, knowing no one would take the boy he'd chosen to protect away from him again. Fall crept slowly through the streets of Oakwood. Dry leaves covered the sidewalks like a crackling carpet, and cold air slipped through window cracks. But inside the courtroom, the air was heavy, not from the weather, but from the tension filling every corner. Michael, still with a bandage on his head and visible signs of the accident, sat beside his mother on the witness stand. He wore a grey sweater and oversized pants borrowed from a paramedic. At his side, on the floor, Max lay with his ears up, his gaze fixed on the accused, Derek Johnson. Derek sat with his arms crossed, his face hard, jaw clenched. He wore a wrinkled shirt and dirty jeans. He had no private lawyer. The public defender beside him looked more uneasy than confident. The judge, an older man named James Peterson, read the statements quietly while reviewing papers with a furrowed brow. "We have medical testimony, forensic evidence, and the boy's statement, backed by the behavior of the dog, Max," he said, adjusting his glasses. "But I want to hear the mother's statement again, clearly." Sarah stood, hands clasped. Her voice shook, but her words were steady. "My husband Derek hated Michael from the start. He always treated him like a burden. I was a coward. I turned a blind eye too many times, but I heard him plan it. I heard him say he'd teach him a lesson. I did nothing out of fear, but now if I have to pay for that, I'll accept it. I just want Michael to have a life away from him. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some spectators bowed their heads, others glared with anger. The judge nodded silently. Then Agent Emily Carter stood. She asked permission to play an audio recording recovered from Derek's phone, left in his truck and found by the police. In it, his voice was clear and cruel. "That blind kid's driving me crazy. If he gets lost in the woods, no one's gonna miss him. I'll take him far, let God have mercy." No more arguments were needed. Derek lowered his head for the first time. For a moment, he seemed defeated. But then he looked up with a twisted smirk. "Everyone feels sorry for a blind kid. What about me? No one gave me anything. Everyone wants to be a hero. Even that damn dog." Max, hearing his voice, stood. He didn't bark or bare his teeth. He just stared, long, steady. As if in that moment, the whole room understood this animal wasn't just a witness. He was a guardian, a symbol of doing what's right, even in silence. The judge banged his gavel. "This court finds Derek Johnson guilty of attempted murder, aggravated neglect and child abuse. He will be transferred to a state prison within the next 24 hours. Michael didn't grasp all the legal terms, but he understood the core. Derek was gone for good. His body relaxed. His lips trembled. He didn't cry. He just leaned down and hugged Max with his small frame, as if needing to melt into him. "I told you God would send someone, and it was you." Emily Carter approached Sarah outside the courtroom. "There's a chance if you agree. I know a woman, a retired police officer. She trained guide dogs for 20 years. She can't have kids, but she's got the biggest heart I've seen. She could give Michael something you can't anymore." Sarah, eyes full of guilt and redemption, nodded slowly. "All I want is for him to be loved." "Then this isn't the end, it's a beginning." And so as Derek was led through the courthouse's gray halls, Michael stepped into the afternoon light, holding Max. For the first time, without fear. For the first time, free. November's breeze blew gently through the open fields outside Maple Grove, a small town less than 2 hours from Oakwood. There, among hills of golden grass and ancient pines that whistled at dawn, stood a white 2-story house with a wooden porch and a swing hanging from a tree branch. Susan Harper lived there, a woman in her 50s with ash-blonde hair tied in a simple bun and hands weathered from years of working with service dogs. She was strong but not hardened. Her gray eyes held the calm of someone who'd seen pain but hadn't let it consume her. She'd been a police officer and a canine trainer. After retiring, she dedicated her life to training guide dogs for the visually impaired. She never married or had kids, but her home was filled with photos, dogs she'd raised, people she'd helped, letters in shaky handwriting from grateful children. When Emily Carter told her about Michael, Susan didn't hesitate. If that boy needs a home, he'll have one, and if that dog wants to stay with him, he's welcome too. 3 weeks after the trial, a gray car pulled up to Susan's house. Emily got out first, then helped Michael, guiding him gently. Max stepped out on his own, steady, and stood beside the boy without a sound. No words were needed. Susan stepped onto the porch and watched them approach. She wore a thick wool sweater and a soft smile. "Hi, Michael, I'm Susan. Welcome home." The boy nodded, head down. He gripped Max's harness tightly. He was nervous, used to fear, wary of anything that seemed too good. "Can I sit?" he asked, barely audible. "Of course, sweetheart," she said, pointing to a wooden bench under the walnut tree. They sat together, the three of them. Susan offered him a mug of hot chocolate, and Michael held it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into his cold fingers. "No yelling here?" he asked, almost like a question. "Here, there's quiet and laughter, and room to heal." Max rested his head on Michael's legs, as he always did when he sensed the boy breaking inside. Michael stroked him slowly, as if each touch reminded him he was safe. That night, for the first time in a long time, Michael slept in a clean bed with soft sheets that smelled of lavender. Max lay beside him, a sentinel. In the dark, the boy whispered to the air, "Thanks for finding me, even when I'd given up." Days passed and Michael began to settle in. He moved through the house with more confidence. Susan taught him patiently how to orient himself, count steps, identify objects by texture. Max followed him everywhere, obedient and alert. One day, Susan set a special harness on the table, designed for guide dogs. I know Max is getting old and has been through a lot, but if he wants, he can train to be more than a guardian. He can be your eyes." Michael smiled, fearless for the first time. "I don't need him to lead me, just to stay with me." Max, as if he understood, stood and placed his head on the table beside the harness. Susan said nothing. She just wiped away a quick tear that slipped out uninvited. Days became routine in Susan's house. Not a prison, but a refuge. Michael woke early, helped feed the dogs at the shelter in the backyard, then walked with Max along the marked paths among the trees. With each step, his stride grew steadier, more aware of the ground, the sounds, the wind's language. Susan watched from a distance, a mix of pride and quiet tenderness. She never tried to fill the role of a mother. She just wanted to be a steady, reliable presence, someone who wouldn't break if Michael trembled. One morning after breakfast, Michael sat on the porch with his feet dangling. He held a small wooden figure he'd started carving with Susan's help. It wasn't clear yet, but he said it was a star. "Wood doesn't give up, but it doesn't fight either," Michael said, running his fingers over its rough surface. "Like me." Max lay beside him, calm, but watchful, always watchful. Susan approached with a letter in her hand. "Something came for you." Michael frowned. "For me?" "Yes, from the state adoption agency." Michael felt the envelope's texture, then handed it to her. "Can you read it?" Susan sat beside him and opened it carefully. "Dear Michael Harrison, we are pleased to inform you that the court has approved your permanent adoption by Ms. Susan Harper. As of now, she is legally your guardian. We wish you a full, safe and happy life. Department of Child Protection." Michael stayed quiet for several minutes. Then, without turning his head, he asked softly, "Does that mean I don't have to leave?" "It means this is your home, now and always." Michael's lips trembled. He touched his face, then the rosary still hanging around his neck. He gripped the cross tightly. "Thank you, God. Thank you for not forgetting me." That afternoon, instead of reading Braille as usual, he asked Susan to take him to the workshop, where she kept her tools and training supplies. A wall there was covered with plaques, photos, and badges. Michael ran his hands over a metal plaque. "Was this Max?" he asked, feeling the K9 shield's shape. "Yes, he was part of the search and rescue unit for 6 years. Found people lost in snow, fires, even earthquakes. He never failed." Michael knelt and hugged Max tightly. "I was his last mission, but I want him to know that he was my first miracle." The next day, Max began light training with the new harness. He wasn't like the young dogs at the shelter. His body bore scars. His steps were slower, but his will was unbreakable. Susan watched, eyes wet and throat tight. "You don't need wings to be an angel," she murmured to herself. Michael walked with Max along the path in front of the house. The sun filtered through the leaves, painting the ground gold. Though his eyes couldn't see, his heart knew the way, not by memory but by love. "Come on, buddy," Michael said, smiling. "Where you go, I go." The days grew colder. Tree branches creaked under the weight of frost, and Maple Grove's skies dawned under thick fog that lingered. Despite the chill, Michael insisted on walking with Max every morning. They moved together, one guiding the other, in near-perfect sync. Susan watched from the window, a mug of tea in her hands. She no longer worried like before. She trusted. Michael had developed a new sense sharper than sight, deep listening. He heard Max's steps, the crunch of leaves, the distance between trees. Everything spoke to him. Everything answered. One morning, after their walk, Susan met them on the porch with a different look. Her eyes held a mix of pride and concern. "Michael, the school for the visually impaired in Riverside called. They have a special program for kids like you. They want to meet you." Michael lowered his head. The word school still scared him. He remembered the whispers, the taunts from before, when he lived with Sarah and Derek, when they called him useless, the shadow walker. He bit his lip, unsure. "Do I have to go alone?" "No," Susan replied, sitting beside him. "Max can go with you. In fact, they want to evaluate him as your official guide dog. You've already come so far together." Michael stroked Max's neck in silence, then lifted his face toward where he thought Susan's eyes were. "What if they don't like me? Then it doesn't matter, because you already have a place here. Whatever happens there, it's just part of your story, not the end." The next day, they traveled to Riverside. The school's campus was large, surrounded by trees with well-marked paths. Other kids and teens walked with canes or guide dogs, some chatting lively, others sitting on benches with braille books. Michael gripped Max's harness tightly as they entered. A teacher, Mrs. Davis, a tall woman with a gentle voice and kind face, approached them. "You must be Michael. I've heard wonderful things about you and this big guy with you." Michael didn't know what to say. He just nodded. Max tilted his head as if he understood the compliment. Over the next few hours, they evaluated him with respect and patience. They asked how he navigated, how he read, how he felt with Max. At the end, Mrs. Davis took them to a quiet room with a piano. "Do you play an instrument?" "No," Michael said, unsure. "Would you like to try?" Michael approached slowly. He ran his fingers over the keys. He pressed one, then another. The sound was clean, pure, like light in the dark. Max sat beside him, silent. Michael closed his eyes, though he didn't need to, and let his fingers wander timidly. Slowly, a fragile, imperfect but alive melody emerged. Like him, like Max. Susan, standing at the door, put a hand to her chest. "I didn't know he could do that," Michael said when he finished. "Sometimes," Mrs. Davis replied, "our gifts are waiting for the right moment to come out. Today was that moment." On the drive back, Michael was quiet, but not from fear. It was a new calm, an inner certainty. "Max, do you think we could really go there?" The dog, as always, didn't answer with words, but he rested his head on Michael's lap, steady, sure, as if saying, "Whenever you're ready, I'm with you." The first snowflakes began to fall in Maple Grove, slowly covering the fields, rooftops, and bare trees. Each tiny crystal seemed to carry a promise of renewal. Inside Susan's house, the fireplace burned softly, filling the air with the scent of wood and peace. Michael sat on the floor beside Max, carefully feeling the strings of a small instrument Susan had found in the attic, an old ukulele, forgotten among blankets and boxes. Though he couldn't see it, he'd cleaned it carefully and asked Susan to teach him how to tune it. Each string was a boundary, a possibility. "You know," he said softly to Max, "when I was younger, I thought I had no talent for anything. Now, I think what I couldn't see with my eyes was always hiding in my heart." The dog whimpered softly as if agreeing. Outside, snow began to cover the porch steps. Susan appeared at the living room door with a coat in her hand. "Put this on, Michael. We have a special visitor this afternoon." "A visitor?" "Someone who wants to meet you, from the service dog training department. They heard about you and Max, and they're very interested." Michael swallowed hard. "They're not going to take Max, are they?" Susan knelt in front of him. "No, sweetheart. No one's taking what life gave you as a gift. They just want to see how you two work together. That's all." When the car arrived, a young woman with light brown hair and a blue jacket stepped out and introduced herself as Jennifer Brooks, a trainer. Her tone was warm, her smile genuine. She carried no papers or clipboard, just a small notebook and a gaze that saw beyond the obvious. "I've worked with many guide dogs," she said, as they sat in the living room, "but I've never seen anything like this. Max wasn't trained for what he does with you, yet he responds like he's always been yours." Michael stroked Max's head, his fingers moving through his thick fur. "He feels things. Sometimes I think he feels more than I do." Jennifer leaned closer, gentle. "Can I do a little test with you both?" Michael nodded. They went to the yard, where snow had formed a thin layer. Jennifer set up simple obstacles, wooden boxes and training cones. Then she stepped back. "Michael, try walking to me, guided by Max. Only if you feel okay." Michael adjusted the harness over his shoulder. He touched Max's side lightly. The dog took a step, then another, slow but sure. "Tell me in the comments, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story so far? Your opinion means a lot to me." Michael followed with confidence, his cane hanging from his arm unneeded. Their steps were steady. They dodged the boxes without touching them, weaving through the cones naturally. When they reached Jennifer, the silence was complete. Her eyes were full of tears. "It's like watching music walk." Michael smiled shyly. "I don't know about music, I just follow the rhythm of his soul." Later, as Jennifer said goodbye, she turned to Susan and said, "This boy, this dog, they can't be separated. We shouldn't change them, just help them go further." Susan nodded. That night, as the snow fell harder, Michael sat by the window with Max at his feet. He held the ukulele, playing a simple, repetitive melody, like a lullaby. "You know, Max, I'm not scared to sleep anymore." Max lifted his head, looked at him with those dark eyes that held all the world's secrets, and lay back down, at peace. Winter eased slowly, The snow blanketing Maple Grove's fields began to melt, revealing patches of grass like shy promises. Birds returned to the trees in small flocks, their soft songs heralding the change of season. In Susan's house, the days were changing too. Michael no longer walked like a boy afraid to fall. His steps were sure in rhythm with Max, who remained strong despite his wear. Their bond had gone from instinct to destiny. There were no commands, no orders, just understanding. Susan had planned a small ceremony in the backyard, not for formality, but for love. She wanted to mark a new beginning for Michael, something symbolic. She set up a wooden table with a lit candle, a photo of Max in his police uniform, a hand-woven blanket, and a small metal plaque engraved with a name, Michael Harper. "Why does it say that?" Michael asked, tracing the letters. "Because you carry my last name now," Susan replied, kneeling before him. "Not because I'm making you, because I'm offering it." Michael swallowed hard. "Does that make me your son?" "It makes you my life." Michael hugged Susan. Long, silent, an embrace that healed 1,000 wounds at once. They sat by the fireplace afterward. Michael played his ukulele while Max rested with his head on his feet. A soft melody whispered from the radio. Suddenly, Susan stood and brought a box wrapped in blue paper. She placed it gently in his lap. "This is for you too, from many people who heard your story." Michael untied the ribbons slowly. Inside, he found Braille sheet music, a composition notebook, special headphones, and a digital recorder. "What's all this?" "A portable music studio. So you can compose, record, play, create. They want to hear what you have to say, through sound." Michael touched the pages like they were gold. "What if I don't know how to start?" "Then just listen to your heart. It knows the way." That night before bed, Michael stayed awake. The room was silent, but he heard everything. The creak of wood in the wind, Max's slow breathing, the distant echo of his own thoughts. "Max," he whispered, "I'm not scared of the dark anymore. You taught me to see it from the inside." The dog lifted his head slightly, a small gesture enough. Michael turned and touched the rosary still around his neck. "Sometimes I think God didn't save me from the pit. He just pushed me toward you." A long, deep sigh filled the room. Max settled closer to the boy, as if he knew what was coming. Days later, during a walk, Susan noticed Max moving slower. His breathing was heavier. They took him to the vet. The diagnosis was clear: age-related wear with signs of heart failure. Not urgent, but irreversible. Susan hid it from Michael for a few days, unsure how to prepare him. Until one afternoon, as the sun set and shadows stretched, Michael sat on the porch with Max in his lap and said softly, "You don't have to stay for me, buddy. I can keep going." Max whimpered softly, as if he understood. "But if you can stay, just a little longer, that'd make me really happy." The dog licked his hand, then rested his head on his chest. Together they listened to the evening silence like a secret symphony, one only they knew how to play. 3 years have passed. Susan's house in Maple Grove still stood, now with vines climbing the porch and a small greenhouse built beside the workshop. Seasons turned, birds returned each spring, and the wind still whistled through the trees. But inside that house, everything had changed. Michael, now 13, was tall for his age, with a soft but steady voice. His face, still boyish, held a quiet wisdom. He didn't speak of his blindness as a loss anymore. He'd learned to feel the world with his hands, his ears, his heart. He'd composed several melodies, some inspired by Max's steps, others by the sighs of silent nights. One, called "The Heart That Found Me," was performed at a state ceremony honoring service animals. Michael played it live on his ukulele, and at the end he asked for Max's bark, recorded years ago, to be played. The audience stood, applauding with tears in their eyes. Susan, now legally his mother, had become his quiet pillar. She kept training guide dogs, but with a new purpose: helping other kids like Michael. The house had become a refuge, a small center of healing and hope. Max passed on an autumn afternoon, quietly, sleeping at the foot of Michael's bed, as he always did. Michael knew before Susan. When he woke, he felt the absence. Not a void, but a peace. He didn't leave, he told Susan. He just went where good hearts rest. They buried him under the big oak in the yard, where Michael placed a simple wooden plaque. "Here lies Max, my dog, my light." Since then, Michael never stopped walking. With a cane or a new guide dog named Hope, he kept moving along the forest paths, listening to the wind and the echo of paws that no longer made a sound, but still set the rhythm of his soul. Sometimes passing the oak, he'd stop for a moment and say, "I still remember how your heart beat when everything was dark. Thanks for teaching me to see from the inside." And he'd keep walking, face toward the sun, knowing true vision wasn't in the eyes, but in the love carried in the heart. Thank you so much for sticking with this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a ton and motivates us to keep bringing new stories every week. And since you're here, take a moment to check out another one of our stories that's popping up on your screen. Big hug and see you next time. Stay well.